The alarm tore through my ears before my eyes were even open. Red lights spun across the walls of the outpost. Something had broken through the outer fence, and every screen in the control room was flashing the same warning: unknown creature inside the perimeter. I grabbed my jacket and ran. My name is Daniel Whitfield, and I had been stationed on this frontier world for 11 months, studying a planet that still had more questions than answers. We had built our outpost on the edge of a reed marsh, far from any city, far from any comfort, because this was the only place the scanners had picked up strange energy signals rising from the ground. Nobody expected the signals to have teeth. Outside, the wind was sharp and cold, cutting across the open field toward the broken section of fence. 2 guards stood frozen, weapons lowered, staring at something moving through the grass. I pushed past them and saw it for the first time. A small creature, no bigger than a large dog, orange scales catching the moonlight, wings still wet and folded tight against its back. It was screaming, a high, painful sound that made my chest tighten. It was alone, no parents, no others of its kind anywhere near it. Just a frightened, wounded baby dragon, dragging itself through torn wire, blood staining the grass beneath it. I did not think. I dropped to my knees in front of it, ignoring the shouts behind me, telling me to stay back. The creature snapped its jaws once, a warning, but its strength was fading fast. I lifted it into my arms, careful of the torn wing, and carried it straight to the lab before anyone could stop me. Dr. Grace Ellison met me at the door, eyes wide with alarm. She was the only medical officer we had, trained for humans, not for alien wildlife, but she did not hesitate. Together we laid the creature on the table, and for the next 2 hours, we worked without stopping. Grace cleaned the wound along its side, careful not to touch the fragile wing. I held its head steady, speaking in a low voice, though I had no idea if it understood a single word. By sunrise, the bleeding had stopped, but the creature would not eat, would not sleep, would not calm down. It curled into a tight ball in the corner of the enclosure and made a thin, miserable whistling sound that echoed through the entire building. Every worker who passed by said the same thing. That sound was unbearable. It sounded like grief. 2 days passed like that. Nothing worked. Not food, not warmth, not soft words. The creature, who I had started calling Ember without asking anyone's permission, seemed to be slipping further away from us with every hour. On the 3rd night, a supply ship finally reached our outpost, carrying packages from home. Among the crates was one addressed to a young soldier named Oliver Bennett. Inside it, wrapped around a jar of homemade sauce from his mother, was a small knitted hat, blue and white, with a crooked little pom-pom sewn unevenly on top. It had been made for his sister's cat, who was thousands of miles away and would never wear it. Oliver laughed when he saw it and tossed it aside, calling it the ugliest thing he had ever received. I picked it up without thinking much of it, walked to Ember's enclosure, and placed it gently on her head, more out of exhaustion than any real plan. The whistling stopped instantly. Ember went completely still, her golden eyes locking onto mine, and then she made a sound none of us had heard before, a low, warm chirp that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. From that moment, the hat never left her head again. We learned quickly just how serious she was about it. When Grace tried to remove it for a checkup, Ember clamped her jaws and refused to open them until the hat was placed back exactly where it had been. When her first shedding began, scales falling away in patches across the enclosure floor, she still refused to let the hat slip, holding perfectly still through the entire uncomfortable process, just to keep it in place. It became almost funny, watching this small, stubborn creature defend a lopsided piece of yarn like it was the most valuable object on the planet. But nothing about what happened next was something any of us could have predicted. 3 weeks later, an urgent message arrived from command. A delegation from a neighboring alien alliance, known as the Kael'th Concord, was arriving for trade discussions. These meetings had been delayed for months due to tension between our two peoples. Nobody was in a joking mood. The delegation had a reputation for being serious, precise, and easily offended by anything they saw as disrespectful. The morning they arrived, our commanding officer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Charlotte Briggs, gathered the entire team for a briefing. Everything had to be perfect. No mistakes. No surprises. Of course, that was exactly the day Ember decided to escape her enclosure. I was standing near the meeting hall when I saw her small orange shape slipping through the open door, hat still firmly in place, tail swishing with confidence, as if she had been personally invited to the negotiations. My heart dropped into my stomach. I sprinted after her, but I was too late. She walked straight into the hall and sat down directly in front of the lead ambassador, a tall, insect-like being with 6 gleaming eyes and long, delicate limbs. The room went silent. I froze in the doorway, certain that this single moment was about to destroy months of careful diplomacy. Then the ambassador leaned forward, examining Ember closely, her attention fixed entirely on the crooked little hat. And then, to the shock of everyone present, she made a sound none of us expected. She laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and genuine, unlike anything we had heard from her people before. She turned to Charlotte and said something through her translator that made the entire room hold its breath. She said that our creature was wearing what her people called the mark of the sky kin. According to old stories passed down through generations of dragons on this planet, there had once been gentle travelers from the sky who wore small woven crowns and cared for orphaned young as if they were their own. It was said that any creature marked this way was protected, loved, and trusted completely. Nobody in that room had ever heard this story before. Nobody had planned it. It had happened by pure accident, a soldier's unwanted gift turned into an unexpected symbol of peace. Word spread quickly. Within days, the wild dragon clans living deep in the marshlands beyond the fence began approaching the edge of our territory. They did not attack. They did not threaten. They simply waited, patient and quiet, until someone brought Ember out to show them she was safe and well cared for. I stood at the top of the outpost tower and watched as a dozen massive dragons, each easily the size of a small aircraft, settled onto the ridge outside camp. Ember waddled toward them without fear, hat still in place, chirping happily, as if greeting old friends. One of the elder dragons lowered her enormous head and sniffed carefully before letting out a low, rumbling sound. Our translators struggled to capture its full meaning, but the closest words were simple and clear. Good. The Skykin still keep their promise. Everything changed after that. Trade routes that had been closed for months suddenly opened. Dragon scouts began guiding our survey teams safely through the dangerous marsh paths we had once avoided out of fear. The Kael'th Concord, impressed by what they called the sincerity of our people, agreed to terms that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. None of it made sense on paper. A knitted hat, made for a cat that never arrived, had somehow become the reason 2 very different worlds began to trust each other. I still think about it often, especially now, months later, watching Ember grow far beyond the size she once was. She is enormous now, strong enough to guard the entire outer fence on her own, yet she still wears that same hat, stretched thin and barely covering one horn, looped carefully around her neck like a treasured bracelet. None of us have ever tried to take it away from her again, and honestly, I doubt any of us could. Command recently asked if we could design an official version of the hat for future diplomatic missions, something more polished, more professional. I told them clearly that it needed to keep its crooked shape, or it simply would not work the same way. There was something about its imperfection that made it real. Looking back at everything that happened, from the frightened, wounded creature dragging herself through torn wire, to the tense negotiation hall filled with anxious officials, to the quiet ridge where ancient dragons finally chose to trust us, I understand now that the most important moments rarely come from careful planning. They come from small, unexpected acts of kindness, offered without any thought of reward. A soldier's unwanted gift, a moment of desperation, a stubborn little creature who refused to let go of the one thing that made her feel safe. That was all it took to change the future of two entire worlds. Sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest weight, and sometimes the universe rewards us in ways we could never have imagined, simply because we chose to be kind when no one was watching.